thank you so much to everyone for joining this lunchtime webinar around improving equity in digital health. My name is Dillan Yogendra and I'm an account director at Silverbuck, and we're the UK's leading health tech comms agency, and we're delighted to be supporting such an important topic for so many of us. In terms of providing some context, and in case anyone does need a reminder, that earlier this year it was reported that the owner of one of the biggest digital health companies in England had made some vile comments about Diane Abbott, the first black woman elected to Parliament. It was at this point that Ayesha Rahim, a portfolio psychiatrist, Victoria Betton, director of PeopleDotCom, and Hassan Chaudhury, a non-exec director at Opto Health, brought people together to sign an open letter within a few hours, and which I'd encourage you to sign if you haven't already. The letter would provide an opportunity for the community to take a stand against racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination. The creation of an equity charter started to take shape, which will consist of a set of principles and levers that can be used to hold ourselves and others to account, but also recognise that it's not okay to be neutral on this type of issue. It was at the Rewide event in Birmingham that its CEO, John Hoeksma, read out the statement at the final session, and it was reported in the publication's newsletter. And that's when things really started to take off. OK, so we've got an incredible lineup of speakers today, including the leaders behind the Equity Charter. But we're also really fortunate to have Monique Carayol giving a short keynote speech to kick things off. And before I hand over to Monique, I wanted to remind you all that we'll be recording this webinar, and the session will include a 30-minute panel session with Ayesha, Hassan and Victoria, following on from the keynote, which will also give you the chance to send me questions to pose to the panel too, before we hopefully promptly wrap up at 1:15 p.m. So without further ado, let me introduce Monique, who is an experienced leadership coach, an ex-NHS director and host of the Bravery in the Boardroom podcast. Monique's superpower is her ability to encourage, influence and develop others to take action. And she describes this as making it happen with an energy that motivates and builds confidence. And so who better to talk to us today about the importance of equity? Monique, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you so much, Dillan. And wow, that's a big intro, right? Thank you so much for giving me some time today. When the Equity Charter team asked me to come and open this webinar, my thoughts straight away went to, I want to talk about the power of a movement. I want to speak to you for just a few minutes about why I believe we need collective action. So I want to touch on, like I said, the power of a movement, about barriers. We spend a lot of time talking about barriers, and I'm not asking us to admire the problem today, but I do want to unpack why we need the movement to address and remove the barriers that I think we all know are there. And then most importantly, taking action. I'm going to touch on this, and Ayesha will say a little bit more about it, I know, later on through the Q&A as well. But why did I start Bravery in the Boardroom, and why does it connect, and why do I see the power of the Equity Charter and what you're trying to do? Because I believe that when we are trying to drive big change, my background was a change agent in the NHS. I was a commissioner for 10 years, and then I moved into a director of strategy and transformation role. So I had a lot of responsibility about driving change across organisations, across teams and across systems. And actually what I know is about the need to maintain momentum. You know that feeling when it feels like you're pushing that big boulder up the hill. You can't do it on your own. And what we see, especially in the EDI and equity space, especially when we see people trying to tackle discrimination, is people get tired. People get targeted as individuals. People get tired. People get burnt out. People become traumatized. And that's why I believe we need the momentum of collective action and energy to come together. Why do I say that? Because we also have expertise as a cohort. When we come together, it's not just our energy, it's about what we all bring to the table. We all have something that we can bring and use. And when you come together as a movement, you get the magic of what that makes happen. And that's what I've seen in 2.5 years of leading Bravery in the Boardroom, how we've brought the real conversation. I see that echoed here, how we're not just admiring the problem. So we may be having conversations, but they are conversations that are directing action. And that is what I can see. There is a brilliant and big opportunity to be able to do that here with what's been kicked off if we can maintain momentum. What's the other thing that a movement brings? It widens reach. Yeah. And I think I'm so pleased that this has been recorded as well, because actually when we have space like this to come together, this is evergreen. We can come back to this. You can share it. You're going to have a call to action later, right? But actually just calling out, one of the things you can do is to share this, share the recording, share what you're hearing here. When you see it bounce past you on your social media feed, share it there as well, because if we can widen reach, you can increase the power of the movement. You can increase the breadth of the movement. We've all sat here and said we never want to see something like this happen again. But it can feel like you're boiling the ocean when you are looking at the enormity of that situation and where you may be sitting and what you may be holding. But if you do put what you can do into the space of a movement, if we can reach other colleagues and share why did you join the call today? What inspired you to join the call today? If you can share that with somebody else, I know that we widen reach. And I mentioned then about channeling. So I mentioned collective energy and expertise. And now then you come to that next step of how do we channel that? And I mentioned barriers. So there are 3 types of barriers that I want to call out. There are many barriers, okay? But there are 3 that I want to call out now. First one being about equity barriers. Helping organizations, helping people holding power roles to understand and remove their equity barriers is absolutely crucial if we want to see more inclusive environments, if we want to see spaces where there is equity of voice, if we want to see, we're talking about digital health, where people who are innovative, people where talent is everywhere, people being able to come into this space to bring their ideas and to flourish. If we want to see organizations being ethical in the decisions of who they do business with, then we need to be able to understand and remove some of those equity barriers. And there will be people on this call today who understand those more than others. Really important. We share that insight and we lobby for that. Systemic barriers. It's an absolute reason why we must have the power of a movement, because to topple down long-standing, deep-rooted systemic barriers needs deep work. Now, I'm not saying that to put us off. I'm not saying that because I believe we can't do it. What I'm saying is we need to maintain momentum and have collective energy to tackle those and to keep tackling them. And it's not coming at it from one angle. It will be many angles. And that's why I know part of today is about trying to bring people together to say, what do you think we can do? The Equity Charter team are not sitting here saying we've got all the answers, but what they did have was the bravery to put their reputation and their time on the line to try and get something moving here. What about our mindsets though? So I'm a leadership coach. And one of the things that you will always hear people talk about when they mention leadership is mindset. Yeah. And they say, all starts with mindset. And sometimes people roll their eyes about that. Oh, I hear that everywhere. Why does everyone say it? But it's because it's true. If your mind is right and you believe there is something that you can do, it's about removing those barriers in your mind first and foremost. Sometimes we think because I don't hold that big title, because I don't, run my own business, I can't take those risks. I can't do that. I'm not you, Monique. I couldn't stand up on a public platform. Well, listen, I'll tell you something. I'm not an ideas person. Never come to me if you want that innovation or you want that idea. It's not my bag. But if you have that idea, I absolutely can bring the clarity, my gift of speech and my determination and tenacity to move that boulder forward and to bring other people on board. So I know what I bring to the table and I offer to share what I know, but what you have may be different. And that's why the collective power and energy is important. So removing the barriers in your mind about what you think you can't do, I want to ask you to start thinking about what you can do. And that brings me to my final point about taking action. I mentioned already, Hassan, Ayesha and Victoria have been brave and taken action. Dillan and his team are here and they're offering what they can and what they know. There are many others behind the scenes as well who have stepped forward and said, we're willing to be brave. What can we do to help here? We want to do something different. The point I want to leave you with is this isn't about us admiring the problem. Okay, this isn't another conversation or another space where we just circle it and we admire the problem. We really want to see some change here. And I know you do too. That's why you've given your time. So I'm asking you to focus on what you can do today. Yeah, when you're listening, when you're hearing, and I know Aisha's going to give some very clear calls to action, but I want you to think about what it is you can do, because there is something that we can all do. And I touched on it already. Please step forward and share what you know. Please use what you have, but let's really get some power and momentum behind this wonderful movement that has kicked off as the Equity Charter. So I think I'll leave it there and allow us to move on.
Absolutely fantastic. So inspiring around the opportunities that this space allows, Monique. Thank you so much, talking about a variety of issues, but that kind of power of a movement and why bravery is so important in standing up for equity really kind of shines through. Let me just take this opportunity to reintroduce the panel and the leaders behind the Equity Charter and interrogate some of those issues, if that's all right, following on from your short keynote, Monique. I think perhaps over the next kind of 25 minutes or so, a useful starting point might be to talk about the catalyst for the Equity Charter and why positive action is so important. Is that something that I can point to you and ask you to come forward to kind of expand on, if possible, please, Ayesha?
Yeah, thank you very much for that intro, Dillan. So you alluded to some of the catalysts for this, which of course were the comments that came to light in the mainstream media back in March of this year. And I recall it took me a good day to fully process what I'd read and what I'd heard had been said about a public figure, a woman of colour, Diane Abbott. And so my first reaction was one of shock, and I went through a whole variety of different emotions actually, but the overriding emotion I felt was motivation to actually do something, because it just felt so shocking to me in this day and age that somebody could be so emboldened to make comments like that in front of other people. So that was the trigger for this piece of work, and it coincided, people may well remember, on the eve of one of our biggest tech conferences, Rewired, which happens over 2 days in March. And so I wasn't present for the conference for the first day, but I had intended to come for the second day. So I'd had this 24 hours to process, to understand what I'd heard, and to think really how I could act and do. And what really became apparent is that actually quite quickly it was moving away from a single individual. This was about how can we do something really positive and proactive, and actually put out a statement of our feeling that actually this wasn't okay. And I remember tweeting something like this out, but actually it still is something that I think about, because the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. And for me, hearing bigotry in any form is not okay with me. And I didn't feel I could just sit there and say, oh, hey, wasn't that horrible? I felt I had to do something. And so Victoria and I bumped into each other at the Rewired conference on the second day. And I mean, Victoria, you'll remember we both felt equally passionately about how we had to do something, if you remember. And I think that was the genesis of actually trying to draft some kind of statement for the community, that we could all galvanise ourselves, each other, the community, to put a positive statement of intent that this wasn't okay and this is what we are going to do about it. So that was how this all started, really. And of course Hassan was there as well, and very quickly he came on board. But do you remember, Victoria, when we got together, we were furiously typing away trying to draft something?
We were just absolutely incensed, weren't we? And we squirreled ourselves away in the speakers lounge writing something, and Hassan joined in, and we had such a good response even straight away. So John Huxmer, who many of you will know, who runs the Digital Health Rewired conference, was really supportive. We chatted to him, he gave us some advice about how to craft the statement, and then that was on the second day. So on the final session, he gave you a slot, didn't he, Ayesha, to read out the statement, and then Hassan arranged for your colleagues at Bloom to create a website really quickly for us. So we were able to start getting signatures straight away. So it all happened really quickly. It was very tactical and not necessarily carefully thought through, but we were sort of acting on our instinct and our sort of fury, really.
Just on that, I think, guys, is it possible just to touch on the response, the kind of mood music? I recall quite vividly what it was like, and how passionately the industry and people I was speaking to at Rewired felt about it, right? Is that something you can expand on and kind of just sort of share with the audience if possible, please?
Yeah,
maybe that's sorry for Hassan, possibly. Sorry.
Yeah, you go, Hassan.
Thank you so much. The mood music was privately that it was unacceptable. And there's lots of really value-driven people in our community. That was great. But it got me thinking, and forgive me, this is going to sound controversial. The episode made me think that racism and misogyny is still socially acceptable. And the reason I say that is because there wasn't enough of a backlash. And that reaction wasn't strong enough, wasn't public enough, and didn't close down the behavior with any real leverage. And that's what really offended me, even more than the statements themselves. It was the lack of a unified response. It was a lack of ability for a whole group of people to be able to pivot with a common view. And I knew that was a gap. And I was really glad to see Ayesha and Victoria talking about this. I got a message from Ayesha saying, "Come meet us in the speakers lounge," and I could see them working, and I couldn't get to them because there were other conversations. By the time I got to them, they'd already got quite a way through, and I thought to myself, there's an opportunity here to do more than just make a statement about this one episode, and that's what really excites me about the Charter. It's a way for us not just to define the values and the reaction to one episode, but for us to now have a common view to similar episodes so that we can all say with one voice, racism, misogyny, bigotry are socially unacceptable. But that was the mood music. It was private, unacceptable anger from a lot of people, but not enough action.
I would agree with that, Hassan, because I think, if I were to sum up the reaction to this, I would say it's mixed. And that might seem surprising to some people, actually, because I guess if you're on this webinar, if you're watching this on the catch up afterwards, you're probably doing it because you're already interested in anti-bigotry and anti-racism and anti-misogyny. But actually, there's a whole cohort of people that are on the fence or undecided or a bit unsure as to what it means to publicly state that you are an anti-bigotry person. And I think that's part of where our challenge lies, because I don't think anybody was actively endorsing the comments that were made, but it's that next step that sometimes there's a little bit of a barrier and people feel unsure as to how to proceed for a variety of different reasons, I guess. But if you are already sold on the importance of this, it might surprise you that there is a mixed reaction, but there was a mixed reaction. I think it's important to acknowledge that.
And I think I really like what Monique said about momentum. And I suppose what we're trying to do is generate some of that momentum and that sort of new social norm. So, hopefully, as Ayesha said, someone felt emboldened to make those public comments. Hopefully, whatever their views, they wouldn't feel comfortable to say that again. And if they do say it, that the community feels more confident to stand up either individually or collectively and say that's not okay. So that's a sort of shift that we would love to be part of and love to see.
Really useful. I should just quickly remind the audience, I know there's some comments, feel free just to kind of pop any questions in the box, kind of, I think it's the top right of your screen, but just a couple of other things from me, maybe before I pass on to some of the kind of audience questions. Can you just expand a little bit around the Equity Charter, what we're kind of hoping to get from that? And also just something Monique touched on these kind of systemic barriers. I think Victoria maybe and Ayesha just kind of touched on these. How can we overcome these systemic barriers? It's such an important thing that we need to overcome, but it's possibly easier said than done. But what can we all do, guys? And what can the Equity Charter really provide?
So I don't mind taking this. So obviously this all happened sort of the middle of March, and we're now in early July. And so people might rightly be wondering what on earth we've been doing in the intervening months. So what we have been doing is to work in the background to work on the action part of what we were talking about at the start of this webinar. So one of the things that we were really clear, as I said, it was about creating some positive action and actually thinking proactively about how we can bake in equity into all we do in our procurements, in our dealings within digital health, whether we're in the NHS or whether we're in industry, whether we're customers, suppliers. And so what we wanted to build was an equity charter. So setting out a statement of principles so that we can hold ourselves and each other accountable in terms of baking in that equity into the work that we do. And so to that end, what we have organised is a summit, an equity charter summit that is happening towards the end of July. And we've invited a small number of key stakeholders to help us flesh out what such a charter might look like. And just to expand on that a little bit more, we want to get 3 things from this event in July. We want to create the equity charter itself with the help of all those great minds that we are inviting to this event. We want to then build a set of actions that accompanies the charter, because quite frankly, equity charters and nice statements are 10 a penny. What matters is movement and what we do. So we want to create an equity charter, a set of actions that will accompany the charter. So if you sign up to the principles, this is what you need to do to put it into practice. And then thirdly is thinking about how we might lobby for change more broadly in the environment that we work in, looking at our procurement framework. So again, this is about positive action. How do we bake in those sorts of principles that we hold dear, those values that we hold dear, into everything that we do in terms of our digital health behaviour.
And we want to think about accountability as well, don't we, Ayesha? So if we're signing up to something as individuals or teams or organisations, how can we hold ourselves and each other accountable to sort of adhere to those standards, those principles? And I think it's worth saying as well, in addition to the summit that we plan to hold, we've got like 1,000 or so signatures, individuals. We've got loads of organisations. We're so grateful to everybody who put themselves, went out of their way to sign up. So we want to engage with that broader group as well, and check in on whatever we start to produce. So we'd like this to be as interactive a process as we can manage within our small resources available to us. We would like this to be an interactive and sort of collegiate process.
Fantastic. Anything from you on that point in particular, Hassan? Any of the kind of conversations that you're having as well with kind of stakeholders, companies, contacts in the industry that you can kind of share with our audience as well?
Yes, absolutely. This is a shout out to Monique, actually. And I'm not sure that even Monique realizes the power of speaking about bravery, because to be brave it sounds amazing, it sounds aspirational, but how to be brave? How is it we can be brave, not just in the boardroom, but when it comes to these issues? So what we're really trying to do is give a focus and a way for people to realize these are the principles that we have to defend. These are the things that are unacceptable, that we will not stand for, that we will not allow. And I really detest, I really hate someone punching down. There was no way that Hester, and it's not really about him only, but there's no way that people like him in their little bubbles, when they can get away with it, when they feel emboldened and they're punching down, they shouldn't be allowed to get away with it. And though in that one instance it was black women that he went after, there are other marginalized and underestimated groups. So I think we should stand together and be brave. And that's what this means to me. So when I've spoken to leaders about why they haven't responded in the way that I wanted them to, and I've done this privately, I'm not out to embarrass anybody or to put people in difficult situations. Many of them said, look, my role prevents me from doing so. Some said within the confines of working in the public sector, this is the most I can do. And many of them have signed the charter as an organization or as individuals on behalf of their organization. But many people feel that there is a need for us to explain what bravery means in this situation. So shout out to Monique, who isn't just using it as a word, she means it. And I think it has started to affect a lot of us in the community. So big love.
Thank you, Hassan. And I think we just touched on possibly the next steps, the workshop. I don't know if there's anything more around the workshop we want to kind of talk about, but just to kind of reiterate this sort of community, the value of allyship, I guess, is something that I wouldn't mind kind of drilling down into if possible, please. And I don't know, Victoria, I know something we've talked about previously. Is that something you want to expand on, and the kind of value around allyship?
Yeah. So sometimes it's called allyship, some coalition, but I didn't think I was complacent, but this situation made me realise that I have complacency. And I think Ayesha, Hassan and we've had lots of conversations, and we're not claiming to be experts in equality, diversity and inclusion. We were just incensed by a certain moment. So I think each of us sort of individually and together are on a bit of our own sort of learning journey. And I've been, you know, really spending time educating myself. And I think for me, allyship it touches on what you said, Monique, about sort of the mindset barriers. It's about going, actually, when I hear something I don't like, even if those people who are affected aren't in the room, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say something. If I'm a man and I'm invited onto an all-male panel, I'm going to say no, I'm not going to be on that panel. It's about standing up and being counted, either as an individual, a team, or indeed as an organisation. And ultimately, you know, we're here, digital health companies are here, people in the NHS are here to provide good care and treatment, to provide good patient experience, and people need to be able to flourish in those environments. We all do, and we need diverse teams to produce good digital health products and to produce good healthcare outcomes with and for people. And if we're in an environment where we're subjected to those sorts of comments and views, then that's just going to have a negative impact on all of us in our view. So I don't know whether Ayesha and Hassan want to expand, but for me, it's just about a process of learning and education and bravery, actually having the courage to go, that's not all right. And that might be privately between two people, it might be in a group, or it might be more publicly. But I think there's all things each and every one of us can do probably every day, actually, just to make that small difference in a big complex system.
I think that's absolutely right, Victoria, because one of the things that occurs to me is that I'm a woman of colour, but that doesn't mean I have all the answers about how to do this. And as you say, you know, I was motivated into action because of a specific event, but that's really spurred me on to educate myself, to learn more. And you don't have to be an expert to make impact. I think that's one key message, that if there's no other message that you take away from this, is that actually just acting and trying your best to, you know, act from the heart in good faith. That's the start. That's all, you know, people are asking for. And yeah, there are loads of ways that you can make individual impact. And I know, Hassan, we've talked about something that you've thought a lot of time about, thinking about how individuals can act.
Yeah, on that note, thank you. I wrote a LinkedIn post and I tried to keep it as simple as possible from the heart. And the first 3 lines were something like, if you see bad behavior, challenge it. And if you see someone who's been a victim of bad behavior, support them. And if you see somebody who is doing that bad behavior and they ask for your support, withdraw it. And the reason I wanted those 3 to be front and center was because I felt people needed to have something really simple to work with. And it is really simple, right? If someone is doing something wrong, your ability to challenge them may only be your voice. It may only be that you can say this is unacceptable and to say this is wrong. But you may also be able to withdraw the procurement. You may also be able to say to them, I'm not going to work with you. Public policy projects immediately said, we're not working with you. John Herxmer said, for as long as Hester's at the helm, we're not working with TPP. That's important. That's the kind of action I was looking for. And those were brave actions. When we needed a website, immediately Bloom Health jumped in to support us. When we wanted pro bono legal support, Bevan Britton jumped in to support us. We needed support. We needed allies so we could do the right thing. And that's what we're looking for. Silverbuck have done the same, and thank you. We need people who will say, no, this is wrong, and I'm going to act. And I think it is about keeping it really, really simple for people.
Can I just add to give a shout out to the King's Fund, who have been super supportive and are giving us space for our summit, and also Restart Consulting, who have given us some financial support as well. And it's been really brilliant to have organisations with resources and assets step up and help us, you know, take things forward. So shout out to everyone that's given us help along the way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Victoria, for that. And I think it is really worth referencing that the community does seem to be coming together, but there's also, of course, there's more that we can kind of do. Just before I pass over to Monique, I wonder if there's anything around calls to actions. I think we really are encouraging people to sign the open letter. Victoria, I don't know if you want to mention any other kind of bits. And there's kind of social media things going on. I think we're trying to encourage organisations to sign the open letter. Is there anything else you want to expand on around that front, please, Victoria?
So we've got a Twitter account, but Ayesha's going to have to remind me the name, Vic, because I'm not a Twitter queen these days.
It's at Equity Charter.
So please follow us at Equity Charter. The website we've just sort of redesigned, and it's going live any minute now, but we'll send the link out afterwards, but it's equitycharter.digital. If it's not live in this precise moment, then just check in half an hour's time. We'd love it if you would sign the open letter, and by signing the open letter, you sign up for us to sort of keep in touch with you, which we'd really like to be able to do. What else is there?
So I think there are a few actions that you've mostly covered them, Victoria, but definitely when the website goes live, you can click on that. You can sign as an individual. I would also suggest that maybe you put this on your agenda for your team meetings and discuss it as an organisation, because actually if we're talking about it, we're more likely to get more people and build that momentum that Monique was talking about. Thirdly, you could sign it as an organisation. So if you take it through your internal governance process, it just helps to give us that mandate, because we've had over 1,000 signatures with some really key organisations that are signed up to what we were about to do, and that really gives us a mandate. But the stronger that we have that mandate, the more power it gives us to be able to take this forward and to continue. So you can sign it as an organisation, start that conversation within your organisation. Even if they don't want to sign it, maybe just talking about it. And I think there is also something about having a conversation with yourself and asking yourself, what are you prepared to tolerate? What are you prepared to do? Because allyship is an active phenomenon. It isn't just calling yourself an ally because you in principle support something. Actually think about what you can do in practice, because you can make impact without being an expert, without having to do a big grand gesture. But those little actions build up into a really big movement, and that's all we did back in March, and this is where we are now.
Sorry, please,
Hassan. I was just going to briefly add that we know that there are loads of good practice and organisations and resources and assets out there, and we're starting to map them ourselves, but we want to curate and share those. But if there are things that you're doing or you're aware of that you could share with us, then we'd just love for you to get in touch with us as well.
So just Hassan, on that point, Hassan, sorry, I don't know if you were about to say something, but can I just quickly pose a question that's just come in actually around what you've just mentioned, Victoria, and someone's just asked if there are any materials that organisations can use, or invites that they can use to extend to their teams to get those topics on their agenda in their kind of local groups or local settings. Is that something you can kind of expand on or talk to, please? Maybe Victoria or Hassan.
Please.
Go, Hassan.
There are materials being developed, and that's actually part of our work. Once we've done our leaders workshop and our summit, we want to produce a toolkit, not just produce a charter, but also stories of those who were involved in producing the charter, so they can talk about their journeys along equity. And I think that's going to be really valuable for groups to be able to use to understand the challenges. The point I was going to make earlier was about being exhausted, and it's something that Monique mentioned, and many people involved in equity conversations will say it. It is possible that you will end up isolated, targeted, and feel as if it's you against the world. And there's a very big gap between you and the silent majority. We're trying to bridge that gap. We're not expecting to get to that immediately, but if we can support those who are going to fight the good fight, say the right thing at the right time, withdraw the support to the bully, and support those who've been bullied, then we need to band together. And we need to band together on ideas. And that's really what we're trying to put together. The Equity Charter is a series of ideas and a way to bring them into action, and a series of stories from people who've tried to live those values and those ideas. And I think that's what we're really hoping to produce as an artifact that we can then present to the community and say, this is for you.
Thank you, Hassan. Sorry, go on,
That's really
Ayesha.
good. Yeah, I was just going to say that obviously we've made reference to this summit that we are holding at the end of the July. We are limited in numbers in terms of who can attend that first meeting. But what we will do is we will circulate the outputs of that summit to the wider community, because as Victoria also mentioned, we do want to do this inclusively, because actually this is our charter as a community. And so we know that there are plenty of people that are really keen to contribute, and we are really keen to hear your contributions as well. So we'll do some more work in a smaller context, and then there will be opportunity to feed into that more broadly as time goes on, hopefully not too long from now.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. Just conscious of time, I just want to kind of thank all the participants for their time and input in today's session. But in closing, I wonder if I can call on Monique just to share any final remarks, maybe just to reiterate any kind of calls to action, in addition to signing the letter that we've kind of touched on. I know one of the sort of audience members has also asked around how taking brave actions has, you know, what kind of impact. Have you got any learnings? Have you got any experience you can kind of share with the audience, Monique, from your experience, perhaps? Is that something you're able to talk to, if that's possible, please?
Yeah, definitely, of course. I think there's something here about when we talk about taking brave action, and thank you, Hassan, for what you were saying there. I mentioned about using what you have, and I heard what Ayesha said about, you know, you don't have to be an expert to make impact. What we've seen is now, this is what I always talk to people about with change. You will have tangible actions, obvious things that you can see. And for me in Bravery in the Boredom, there's two things that I would call out. One is that we are now using it to be able to help people with our resources to get the conversations into their boardrooms and into their senior leadership. And this has taken time because the brand needed to be credible. We needed to have some longevity, and that we weren't just a fly by night. You know, you get people who do this. Oh, yeah, I've heard it all before. Okay, then, you know, sort of sit back and say, how long are you going to last before this disappears? So I call that out because sometimes the action that you will see is not always straight away. If you can get people to listen, if you can get some of the people we're talking about, senior decision makers, into the room, if what's happening for us is I'm being invited into it, come and help us. We've heard you, we've seen you, you're not going anywhere, you're not changing your story, you're telling us impact of what's happened. These are the changes that we need to make and hold us accountable. So for here, the impact is about bringing what you have, but trust in the process is what I'd honestly say, because some of the changes that you'll see will be more, you know, more obvious. We had that conversation in our team. As a result of this, we are now doing X that is different. Some of it is the long game. You know, and if we leave here today and we've provoked thought by this recording, it's disturbed people. The standard that you walk past is the standard you'll accept. What Ayesha said there, if that has touched someone and gone, do you know what, I can't sit back. I'm not spinning it, I'm being honest. Those changes are still actions to move forward. Because as I said, some of the barriers that we're trying to move and disturb are very, very deep rooted. So I want you to be able to see your small step actions. Yes, I was able to get my organisation to sign the charter. Yes, I was actually able to get my organisation, like I said, have a conversation at board level about inclusion and discrimination in a different way that we've had before. Yes, now my organisation is bringing in some expertise, like yourself, to work with our hiring managers so that we look at things differently. Those things are happening. As a result of that, we have seen the change in our underrepresented talent coming through. We have seen more representation at board level. We've seen equity of voice. Because if you've heard me speak before, what I talk about is, in my world, it's not only about representation by sight, it's that people have equity of voice. Okay, that is the measure. It is that people feel, and if we're talking about equity in health, that people feel they have equal opportunity to step into the space with their innovation, to access health and care services, that they are heard and seen in equity, in equal measure. That's our measure of success. That's what I would want to see. So no, as Hassan said, that won't be overnight, but that doesn't mean that we don't still start taking the steps we would now. And the thing that I'd really, really want to say here is, remember, you don't have to be brave on your own. Yeah, you don't have to be brave on your own. It circles all the way back to what I started with, the power of a movement and why our collective energy and expertise is important, but also it's about safety. You know, and what we've spoken about here is, yes, we're asking you to be brave, but we also have to call out about people feeling safe, okay? And you don't always feel safe. And sometimes that's the barrier. Come into the space of the movement, because you will receive support. You will receive people who will stand with you when you are trying to do something. You don't have to be brave on your own. I'm not brave on my own, right? Much as I may be the person sometimes who's speaking, I'm not on my own, and I never have been on my own. And none of my success has been because I've tried to do something on my own. It's always been about the power of movement, my band of believers, those people who are behind me all the way. I've always had that. I'd never, ever say the reason why I drove change, and I've driven change on a large scale, is because I've done it on my own. It isn't. It's been about that ability to galvanize people. And I hope this conversation today, if the charter itself, you know, and you signing that letter hasn't galvanized you, then I hope some of what you hear today and what comes out of the summit in a short space of time will really galvanize you to want to take action. Because as we said there, remember, the standard you walk past is the standard that you'll accept. This is giving you an opportunity and some tools here. You don't have to work it out on your own. This is giving you an opportunity to be able to find a way to change that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Monique. Just conscious of time, and so I think I'd just like to conclude by reinforcing just how important this issue is for our sector and also wider society, right? So I hope this is the time for us all to come together to take positive action and stand up for equity in digital health. But thank you again to all those that have participated today, and to all of you that have taken the time to attend and contribute to this webinar. A recording, as I mentioned, will be available on the Equity Charter website soon, I hope. But please keep an eye out for the outputs of the workshop, which is due to take place later on this month, as mentioned. But thank you again for your time. It's really, really appreciated.